Afternoon everybody. I did say the next video would be a bit different, but the model's not finished yet, but this video is connected to it. Literally really, or it will be, via drive bands. Saying now, this video is really for those who are just starting or maybe want to do something a bit different from the norm. And the norm for most people with say a stationary engine would be to add some tools, some accessory tools like we have here. A WS1 Mammoth Workshop, about a year old I think, not been out the box. They're about 110, 120 quid, and overall a decent buy. Far better buy than the individual tools now, which I think are about 62, 64 quid each. Of course you can buy second-hand tools from probably £5 if you're lucky, £10 up to maybe 40 or 50 for a flat base brass flywheel tool, depending when you get it of course. And internet auction sites obviously are auctions, so you could be paying a bit more or indeed a bit less. But anyway, let's say you've done that, you've had a standard WS1, you've put that on a board, drive it with an engine, you've made your own up like I have with the enlarged Mammoth Tool Workshop, which is still in progress, and you can see videos on that. There's also the Meccano workshop with Meccano set model tools all put on a board, and that's in the in operation in the Henley Gathering 2014 video. But let's say you want something different, or you need something different to accommodate the accessories or tools you've got. So what do? You make your own line shaft. And here's one, or rather most of one, that I've made today. Well, I started yesterday by cleaning up some of the parts with some polish. As I say, this is really for those who haven't been into it long, or maybe haven't got a clue, or points in between. And just to help you out really, very basic construction that can be made with just a few parts and a handful of nuts and bolts and a few washers. This board here, we have here, it's actually just a chopping board that I bought. I think it's about £3. Now for the larger ones I've bought a nice bit of wood that's laminated, and mainly because I need the larger size board. But for smaller stuff, and I must admit that the use of this board has changed since I bought it, so it is a little bit too narrow for the line shaft that I wanted to put on, but I've adapted it and changed my ideas, and I'll let you know a little bit more about that in a bit. So anyway, line shaft, dead easy to make your own. It has to be pretty much in line and solid construction. You don't want it moving around too much, so go for the more heavy duty Meccano parts, not say strips, and certainly not flexible plates. Parts can range from scrap condition to mint, never used, and you can pay all sorts of prices, but the tip is shop around, be patient, don't buy the first bundle of scrap metal or what looks like it for perhaps quite a lot, especially on auction sites. Add the postage to that because some of it can be quite weighty. You could find yourself with nothing more than a pile of scrap. There is a limit to what you can do. Some really bad stuff can be brought back to use, but ask yourself, is it worth it? The main thing though, if the part is straight, then you can do something with it, or if it's not too mangled, you can straighten it out. I did have to straighten one side of one of these angled girders, which was fairly easy. It wasn't on a slight bend in it. So obviously parts may vary to what you want to use and your situation with whatever you're going to drive with it. Many folks will even build the base out of Meccano. I prefer not to do that. One, it keeps the noise down a little bit. Sometimes the noise is okay when everything's running. And the other thing is, I'd sooner use the Meccano for the more important things, such as the actual models or the line shafts to drive the models. Anyway, so what we got? Basically you start with two flange plates here. These are quite old, there's probably late 20s I suppose, dark red, and the slots are in them so you can make the saw with an actual saw blade. The rest of it varies. These angle girders here, green, well there's varying greens and they're a bit faded to say, but they'll be 1950s I suppose. These shorter angle girders are pretty much brand new, only a few years old, and these semicircular plates are probably a bit light coloured actually for the 1970s crane sets, but 70s is probably a good guess. Maybe late 60s, but around them ballpark figures. Now as you can see, none of the parts are mint, apart from these shorter angle girders, which I say are new, but they're reasonably straight. And I use these because they're quite stiff on their own, so there's very little flex. Now by all means you could have used strips here to a point, like a triangle, but you would have had a lot more flex, which might have entailed strengthening up across this way. So although these block the view of the line shaft from the sides, structurally it's more sound. Overall, including polishing a few of the parts, because they're a bit grubby, hour and a half, including hunting out to find the odd parts that I needed. And indeed putting the foam on this base, which is just held on with staples around the edge, and because it's quite big, there's one in the middle. So to start with, it's got to be pretty in line, otherwise you're going to have all sorts of trouble. So build it on a flat surface. You start with the flange plates and these angled girders. Now these are only 7.5 inch angled girders. The reason being, so I'll show you this here, it's going to fit somewhere there like that. The engine will be here, driving the line shaft, then driving the models on the board. The trouble was, as I say, buying the cheap chopping boards means you're obviously limited on sizes you can have, but this was intended for something else, where this would have been quite ample enough, and that something else was simply the workshop, the Mammoth workshop. And I got to thinking of doing something a little bit more, well, should we say, different, fun. So, doing it this way, I should have enough room for the 3 models I intend to put on. But that means that, as you can see, the base of the line shaft is quite near the edges of the board. So I couldn't use the standard sort of 12.5 inch length angled girders. So I've basically moved them in 2 holes and used these. And all these parts are sort of like more or less leftover parts that I haven't yet found a use for them. So again, it is quite cheap. Second hand, of course. You might have to buy new. There are problems associated with the latest sets, and some of them are going to change. I'll come on to that in a bit. So anyway, on a flat surface, take your flange plates, take your main angle girders, turn it upside down on the flat surface, keeping these at the same level both sides. Obviously put them in one at a time. Make sure they're the same or almost the same, because there is a bit of variation in parts, and of course they're old, and as you can see, probably there's a little bit of a kink there. That really doesn't matter for what we want, but you are working with old parts. I mean, these are like 80 years old, possibly those. So once you've got those all in together and pretty much level each side, which again is made easier by doing it on a flat surface, as long as the parts are reasonably straight, then move on to putting the structure on the top. And all you do is add these shorter angled girders at the ends and in the middle, and then to give you more space for different sized pulleys, or maybe even gears or chain wheels perhaps, you need to build up the structure. So I've used these semicircular plates in a basic simple construction really. I'll just put one onto the angled girder across there and then double it up with another one. That's just to give me a bit more height. But because all these are quite stiff, if you like, heavy duty compared to some parts, there's very little flex. Obviously you can move it a little bit, and indeed you might have to, because sometimes these angle girders are not quite 90-degree angle. Now as you can see, there's no axle in place and no pulleys, but I've made this for to fit my situation, if you like. So therefore, one, I haven't got no long axles, the 11.5 inch axles, and very rarely are they straight, I suppose, these days. I've got none of those left, so I've had to accommodate it so I can put shorter axles in, but at the same time make it so I can join those two axles if necessary, and of course support the axles. So instead of just having one support each end and a long axle, and there would be some flex in that, we've got two supports in the middle, but at the same time that should leave us with a bit of luck anyway, certainly enough room to join two axles together across here, and hopefully include the main flywheel pulley in there, which will be a Meccano 2-inch pulley more than likely, weighted with probably extra screws and washers onto it. That's normally the way I do it, because that doesn't take up too much space as long as the bolts that you put in for the weight aren't too long. So that will go in there. The problem is though, when you put an axle in one side and an axle in the other, if you're driving two independently, no problems. It's when you join them you'll start to notice more so the alignment issues. Obviously there is some play in the system, you can slacken screws off and readjust, which you probably have to do. But the idea is I'm going to put one axle there, one axle here, add pulleys as required, which will only be probably 2 or 3 in total, plus the flywheel at the moment, but that means there is scope to add more. And it will be fixed in place first of all, then I'll add the axles and check alignment issues. The killer will be joining and that will show up the alignment issues. Now original Meccano axles are round, but they can be pretty poor condition these days. Indeed, some of the newer axles can be pretty poor on some of the sets. Some issue with the way they're cutting up at the moment. Only on 1 or 2 sets, but not all, means that the axles can be a little bit thick at the ends, and it causes all sorts of trouble getting things on the axle. But most axles that you get these days in the sets, at the moment anyway, are triaxles. That's 3-sided. I know I'm stating the obvious. It's 3-sided, which means, at least I've found, there's more play when you're running one of those axles through Meccano holes. So if you can, use the round ones, and if you need to check if they're flat and true, just a piece of wood, a nice piece of flat wood, a flat surface, and just roll the axle. See if it rotates oddly as you roll it back and forth. You can buy, it is actually 532-inch piano wire, I believe, or that is very similar, and you can buy that. I dare say there are probably the internet's the best place to get it from, but you can buy that, and probably in metre length these days, and you chop it down to suit yourself. Just make sure you finish the end off so you can actually slide things on. So here we are, about a week, 10 days later, and as you can see the line shaft is complete. The most difficult thing is getting an 11.5-inch axle that's still fairly straight. A lot of Meccano axles would have been abused now over the years, so it can be quite difficult to do, to source I should say. This one isn't too bad, just slightly off the true. Because I haven't needed to join two 5.5, 6-inch axles here, I've been able to put some different sized pulleys on, and a bit surprised really, I managed to get a 3-inch on. So we've got a 3-inch, a 2-inch and a 1.5-inch pulley on, thus giving us a variety of speeds at the line shaft. Each side of those, at the moment we've got just 1/2-inch pulleys to each side. At the moment the plan, which you can learn a little bit more about after this little bit here, there's only going to be 3 tools, so won't really need any more than this at the moment. Of course it's well, perhaps not infinitely variable, but of course you can put a hell of a lot of pulleys on each side of here, as long as you've got the power to drive. Of course there's no real bearings in the pivots, in the supports, just some light oil on there, and it's held on both ends by Part 59 brass collar and a washer with ample play. It's probably a bit too much actually at the moment, but we'll see how we get on with that. So we'll drive it from the steam engine onto one of these three pulleys. Of course, the other thing is, whichever one you are using to drive the line shaft, you can use the others to drive other things as well. And I've got loads of 3-inch pulleys, but not many really straight. That one's not too bad. The rest are okay, I think. You may have problems with spring cord drive bands, the thin variety, slipping on some pulleys because they're quite wide. This is quite wide, but it's got a decent V at the bottom, so hopefully it'll be alright. You always try an elastic band as long as the crankshaft on the steam engine is not too near the firebox. You probably get away with that. I wouldn't recommend using Meccano drive bands for the simple thing. The thick ones, the square section ones, the original type, they're going to be starting to degrade now anyway, so you probably want to keep them for softer use these days. But there's plenty of options. You can even use string if you do a small enough knot in some situations. So there you go. That's nice and handy. Spins quite well. I haven't weighted the pulleys. We've got 3 on, that should be plenty. And we've got plenty of space to add loads of pulleys if we need to. So as I say, there's a bit coming up next with a little bit of info about what it's going to be used for. A very simple construction, a way of transferring the motion from the steam engine to one or more other accessories, tools, models, however you want to call them. It will be secured there. The engine, I say, will be here, driving it from a central position, as long as my axles are fairly true. And there'll be 2 models here of the same, and that's just because I already had one model made up and I had another one for Christmas, and it's a shame not to make it really. And then there's another model at the end here which will take a little bit more thinking about to get that to do anything. It will be a bit fun, and when I mean fun, crazy, mad, I don't know, but it will involve these characters here, Rabbids. It's not going to be this model that's powered by steam, but it's a bit of fun. The kids like the Rabbids, and they're actually, to quote Ralph Lawton, there's a lot of traditional Meccano in these sets, so we'll have a bit of fun. That'll be in a couple of videos time, or so. I have got a show to do in between now and then, so watch this space, folks. We'll show it very shortly, and I hope that's been a bit of help to you.